Hello everyone, today we talk about common prejudices and misconceptions essentially fabricated to denigrate history in a way or another. I personally came to terms with the existence of, let's say, widespread ignorance about the most important historical things altogether. I can even say that we all are. I also am. I think that I'm very ignorant about history in many ways, and I don't make a mystery of it because the first step to understand history is, first of all, to realize your own limits and how research, inquiry really start from this, really start from the realization there is a beyond, right? Which is sometimes too challenging, too difficult for people today, especially given their non-existent moral and cultural background to accept the the necessity of an effort of self-improvement that history can give. At least I already made many videos on this topic, probably as an activity, but I would say as an existential condition. Today I will not explain what history is. Again, I've made lots of videos. If you're interested, there is the so-called historian playlist that is dedicated, as you understand from the ancient Greek title, exactly to that, to the truest meaning of history. That again is always identified in different paths, right? And our path is considering that knowledge is fundamentally not a problem. It's not a deterioration of some kind of, in fact, unspoiled primogeneity, but quite the contrary, right? It's our degeneration that has brought to the incapacity of learning and therefore to a faulty understanding of reality, right? And so our struggle is the one getting closer again to the truth through that same reality. And I think that this is the moment where in history when we should be assessing it. It's a moment of a renewed crisis, right? Of a renewed, look at the principles, the foundations, the core values, and what they're supposed to mean, right? It's easy to be Apollonian in moments of success. Then we have to be in the moment instead of harshest struggle to prove whether those values are true. So today we will not digress also in this aspect. I don't know why I took this tremendous path, which is terrifying because, again, I'm studying these things currently, but I should make a video to apart to really focus on what I'm saying. But it's part of the at least the same depreciation and cheapening, I don't know how to say it in English, but say of the historical knowledge per se, right? And where it comes from and where it derives. And I guess that we have all heard in our lifetime some kind of, let's say, of mistaken approach to history that has become almost say widespread at least, and people are prone to believe that things are along that line without further inquiry, in fact, without further history. It's not a coincidence nor a game of words. So I have here a chart that just a sketch that I wrote down in 2 minutes before making the video that is sort of crescendo from actually the most intense and totalitarian and in fact but also more pointless observation. That is, history is useless, right? You would be amazed by how often you hear this. I think the most common negative prejudice, at least towards it. There are also the positive ones. Maybe we can make a video about those two, but today we talk only about these. About history it's about its alleged uselessness. This is literally to say history, is really I don't know what is the point of studying it. Why we learn it in school? Why there are historians? Why there are history books? What's the deal with history? So naturally, when I make these videos, I like to almost psychoanalyze the positions from which such statements are made, because what I think, in fact, historically is important is to understand how people arrive to such a conclusion rather than simply saying, this is just the average idiot, which is the case, by the way, if you were wondering. But again, you're still a human being. So in many ways, if you just dismiss this opinion as, this person is just an idiot, and you wouldn't like to even ask yourself why that opinion came about in its mistake, it wouldn't actually render a great service to yourself as a historian, and your position would be somewhat, in absolute terms, kind of more appreciable than one of person says history is useless, but still not bringing too much on the table necessarily, because you have to start from this point of view that when I make these videos, you realize that yes, there's always kind of a fictional enemy I battle against, but I never again think that I can't be immune from mistake. That is to say, yes, we all hate, I don't know, the opposite political group, whichever it is, but do we actually make an effort to understand why that group is that way? Right? In Clausewitzian terms, you should understand that. You should understand what your, say, opponent is about, because that's factually the only way you can hope to convince him, right, to depose his arms and come to an agreement with it. At least that can be more advantageous, because knowledge can provide you with that capacity, especially if you know that you are superior. And how can you know that you are superior if you don't know what's the enemy about as well, right? So it sounds logical, and it is in fact rational. Now, the prejudice on the uselessness of history, in my opinion, stems. I've known very close people who have owned the same idea. Paradoxically, maybe that also spurred me to become a historian in a way. Not really in the terms of complete uselessness of history, but kind of this question mark, like, what's history for? And the main reason behind the prejudice on the uselessness of history is that probably the person who thinks that doesn't know what history is, that nobody explained him or her. This is easy to observe, like the satirical understanding of history existing in popular culture is this, in fact, largely, as we will see now, probably an unapplicable amount of knowledge that stays deposited in in this huge shelves and old libraries nobody gets in, and that is written by historians that are also stereotypically kind of some rats living in some studium, covered, surrounded by books, covered in dust, and losing dioptries in understanding things that are apparently completely irrelevant. That's kind of the understanding of history. This understanding of this vision, of course, cannot derive, but someone who doesn't know factually what that knowledge is about, what it really tells, right? Because history, as it is taught in schools, frankly, it's useless. Largely, at least if it were taught, it would be useful. But the educational standards, I think, nowadays are completely sinking towards directions that do not really even try to look at history or any other subject in an intelligent way. I must say that most teachers I've seen anywhere talking with them, knowing them, but not because they are teachers, but because they are average teachers, and this is the problem, because they are people themselves. They're not, just teachers, are some of the most radically undereducated individuals that I've ever met, right? And if these people are the ones that teach children something, anything, we are really in a dark place, because the story is really their own as well. These people were the same kids who were taught by other incompetent people that didn't have parents who could provide them with an adequate, understanding of the world, which is also not, let's say, happening by some terrible accident or malicious force that dominates from the above, but it's probably because those, parents were douchebags. And their children are douchebags. So this is one of the things that history teaches us in many ways. And even going back to my childhood and looking at the surrounding world, I must say I was more sociable and even had a kind of a commanding, kind of leadership-oriented attitude towards my peers, and they even followed me and things like that. But when it came to, the average kid, I don't know, in the park or playing games or, we go on vacation, you always met the spoiled brats, not because their families were any privilege or anything, but because they were spoiled, because they were simply let, they rose up like cows in a field, right, without any form of control. And if cows are actually more disciplined, and very much so, but without any check, any control, parents that wanted just to get rid of their kids as quickly as they could, so they would leave them doing whatever they want. They wouldn't check their education. They wouldn't have anything to teach them, frankly. And so, even pretending that their kids were special or provided with any capacity or potential, while were in fact just some failed individuals. Also mostly the careers, or lack of, to say, to this day, 20 years later, would somewhat prove. Now, I'm not kidding, right? You would say, Svartpunk, you're so acid and, and cynical and evil and harsh and uselessly so. Why? Well, because this is what I learned. This, if I lived in a world full of, of bright intellects, I would be very proud of saying out loud, that's the case. And I'm not even referring specifically or strictly to my narrower circle, because I actually attended decent institutions, and the kids who were there, some became actually very good. I have biomedical engineers. I have astrophysicists. I have mathematicians. Yes, I have this company, but at least there were a few, right? The others were more or less but successful, let's put it this way. But the average, also the surrounding world, the thousands and thousands of people that also will never quite remember about, if not for this special single episodes of open stupidity that stand out for your memory to remain, in your memories to remain impressed, accordingly, is really showing a much more detestable picture that actually matches dramatically with anything, with history itself, with politics, social, with stats as we have them. And this is really a crucial point for a historian, that you cannot lie to yourself or the others, right? Historians are not entertainers, at least they're not supposed to be. They're not here to flatter you, at least they're not supposed to be. They're not here to be nice and, empathic and understanding, person's feelings, and they have to tell you reality. And reality is dramatic, right? And they don't make any favor, they don't render any service to you if they tell you things in a way that is not, right? And I hope you sculpt this in your minds. Historians are meant to judge, because if you don't ask a judgment from people who know a lot, as they're supposed at least to, you lose any positive applicability of that knowledge, right? There is no such thing like a true history. And this is also one of the myths, however, how it's flipped in relativistic terms very often. Doesn't absolutely mean that history is not real, right? But in this sense, there is no other way to make history but to judge, right? As we explained countless times, history is not a hard science, but it's a positive thing, right? A mathematician, a physicist, a chemist can, discover all the mechanical deals and maybe, improving him or herself in the very hard work and the attainment, etc. But from the actual result will not mutuate some kind of moral norm. Historians study politics, war, society, so things that you cannot, hard factually prove in the way you would think science would be supposed to be, because not even hard sciences actually achieve that, simply because we don't, foundationally, we don't even understand the concept of infinite, therefore there is no possible truth to be understood. This has nothing to do with the description of reality that is able to make. And naturally, historians study much larger, much more complex systems that they have to find not some abstract speculative explanation for, which would be impossible because of the same size of the system, but something that works in positively, right, in reality, to explain that more, right? And that must be engineered by the same historian. So a judgment is necessary for any possible kind of historical understanding. And historians are meant to judge, which doesn't mean, again, they have to judge on the basis of their own abstract or subjective or, by a certain degree. There is always something of this kind, of course, but or personal inclination, preferences, or with a specific agenda that goes beyond the task of objectively assessing reality through the evidence that is provided with. Right? Again, there is no way to make it absolute, and that's why you need to say, in front of this thing that we cannot fully demonstrate, what's your opinion? The historian must give that opinion. That is, to me, it's more likely this than that, right? And very often that works, right? If you wonder why I use the avatar that I do, it's because that's exactly in a military historical sense what von Clausewitz taught us, theoretically and methodologically, and as we will see now, with positive applicability, which is in fact one of the greatest misconceptions about history, that this thing is useless, it cannot be applied. It is knowing, I don't know, these are the things I remember in my past, a couple of examples to explain better, in fact, what this is, and this is also history. I remember I was in middle school, and there was a classmate who told something along the pattern of saying, I don't know, I don't care, I mean, what's the point of knowing what Napoleon did, right? And already at the time, I thought it was a pretty silly idea, because it's not that you have to make a favor to Napoleon, or, that for some reason you roll the dice and you have to randomly sort out a character from history just to know what they were. So, of course, a 12-year-old kid can hardly understand fully what was Napoleon's importance, but even if you had, I would say, an elementary education already at that point, you should be able to assess it. The idea is that a judgment like that can be expressed just by somebody who doesn't know the radical and enormous impact that Napoleon and all the system that brought him to power had on the world that we're living in. Because until you don't appreciate by which degree you are secularized and modernized and reason the way you do and count the way you do and speak the way you do and have a state the one it is, and why your state is regulated the way it is, what juridically, etc., at least in the civil law tradition. But Napoleon's influence went beyond that as well, and lots of other things involving your same national identity or whatever. You cannot fully appreciate, of course, what Napoleon did, because to you Napoleon is just a guy that you saw in paintings, in a history book, and somewhere around when you went on vacations, in statues or monuments. But it's mute to you. It's like visiting a place without knowing its history. You come there 10 years later when you actually know something and say, wow, I love this much more than before, because I know how important this thing was, and I had it in front of my eyes, but I didn't understand what that meant, right? This means very often giving for granted the value and the meaning, especially of civilization, right? And this is what especially, I think, I speak mostly, of course, for a Western audience. So to me, the greatest problem of the West nowadays is that we gave too much for granted how much we achieved and how much we have compared to the rest of the world. And this is great part of the reason why history is underappreciated, because it's as if we said, okay, we got it, and then stop making any effort for maintaining it, right? And this is the same meaning of why historical knowledge is collapsing, right? This is yet another misconception. People say this is not really true. People today know more history than before. I I agree. I'm sure that people today know more history than before. The problem is how they know it and what they think about that. Because it might have been that even the patchy, standard packed and somewhat minimalistic or simplistic view of history that was enforced, at the beginning of the 20th century by national states was somewhat more effective to the meaning of civilization, to the purpose of civilization, than the type of education we get today. You can know a lot, but if you don't give that substance a form, fundamentally, all that substance will be useless. And that's why moral relativism today is so widespread, because we have lost the perspective on things. Yes, you can have a lot. As for many things, you can have a lot of knowledge, right? People for millennia spit blood and sold their relatives and did everything they could to get an education. Today we have the entire knowledge, an infinite knowledge that you will never have, even a million lives, in fact, to learn entirely, a click away, and nobody gives a freaking damn. And you will naturally absorb part of this knowledge. I still think that it's debatable that people know actually more history today than before, in a sense. But because I think that, at least in proportion to our own capabilities today, also the level of knowledge is quantitatively less, right? So you should always, in this historical sense, reason in relative terms. But especially it has, as we were saying before, it has no form. So again, everybody can have heard about something, but not having a real capacity of criticizing that, analyzing that, put it in perspective compared to other things. I was getting some spam, at least from my point of view, my private Schwerpunkt email. I don't know, because I registered on Quora or something. I don't know why, but this was years ago. And recently they started sending me, oh, look, this guy made this question and this other people answered. And yesterday I blocked that email address of Quora, because they kind of flash you with this immediate answer. There was a user that I don't know even what kind of qualification they had. I was actually reading it because it was written there, but I wouldn't honestly understand whether this person was a historian or whatever. I don't think so. It was just one of these fake, in fact, professions that I think most of today we're floating in the tertiary area with, that was answering to a question like, how could, like the typical stupid, I will not qualify it further because I would be stereotyping too much. You would be offended in part, but it's always the same topics. That is to say, as if nobody ever wrote or said anything about it, by the way. And unfortunately, the proof that nobody cares about it was evident in the same answer. That is, or also in the question for that matter, that is, how could Hitler won World War II? Now, let's skip the question, but let's go to the answers. The answer went in a pattern as there was a silly premise like, I don't know, it was even worse than the answer itself, I don't remember, but it says, well, first of all, Hitler should have not allied himself with Italy and Japan. Now, I stopped reading right away because I don't have time to waste, but I guess that's the kind of people that we are giving, say, credit for without even, so that by algorithmically, I not only would receive that that letter with that specific topic, but also would read that specific answer that I suppose was the most voted one or something like that. That is, if you have known anything about the 1930s, the 1940s, like a person who says, Hitler should have not allied himself with Italy or Japan, the question is, have you even passed primary school? I mean, seriously, what do you think that Hitler allied himself with Italy? And what do you think in terms of, the broader Nazi vision of how the world had to go relatively to the Soviet Union, all this stuff, and, the type of and the amount of labor force that it needed, and eventually the conquest of France, and the strength of the French or Italian industry or whatever, in function of the war with the Soviets, and also Japan, you're essentially going at war sooner or later with the US, why wouldn't you ally with Japan? That is the power that is containing the US, the control at least of some out of the Pacific, with all the difficulties, because Japan had really not many shots against the United States to win the war, but at least to prolong it much longer than they actually did if it had been successful in other instances. The question, what do you know about European politics of the time? How do you think, what was the option that Hitler should have allied himself with? Should he allied himself with the United Kingdom to eventually take over the European continent? This is what the British always tried to stop, to prevent anyone from doing. But what is your, with whom should he have been allied? Right, let's leave aside other stereotypes. We will have to talk about World War II at some point, but how, again, people in the 21st millennium, people from educated countries with an alleged education, etc., would give an answer like that. Like, and people even kind of saying, well, yeah, okay. That's the kind of problems that we're facing with reality. The complete alienation from the same. That is to say, not even attempting to say, well, I haven't read a single book about not just the Second World War, but about 20th century elementary politics, right, in my lifetime. And trying to hide, there is no shame of that. Before, people were ashamed of their own ignorance, they were ashamed of their own incompetence, they were ashamed of their own inferiority, because this is what it is. You are simply less capable of understanding the world, and that's something pretty bad. Again, you should be ashamed of that, because that shame should boost you to actually learn something and be better. Right? We need to repristinate the concept of superior and inferior, because if you eliminate that, you eliminate even the common sense of decency, of saying, I'm disgusting ignorant that 2 + 2 makes 5, and I shouldn't even be challenged in that, because otherwise it would hurt my feelings. Not only you should be forced to learn that 2 + 2 makes 4 by understanding why it is, but also, if you don't, you should start being beaten. Maybe, breaking one bone after the other. And then we will surely have a better civilization. Maybe not exactly with this brutal means, but in practice, like if you really can't make 2 + 2 correctly, what are your chances to be a relevant citizen? Right? Why should you be considered even as a citizen? Why should you have equal rights to a person who has earned a greater capacity of understanding? Right? Here we're not talking even necessarily about how much you have to handle, or what were exactly your. Here we're talking about the objective capacity of a person to be of positive use to the community, which is an undeniable fact. Because, again, try to make a person go out in the world without that knowledge. Why do you think there is something like mandatory education? Because somebody woke up one day and decided children had to go to school. Have you wondered why all civilized countries adopted this? All the world adopted this. This is being increasingly viewed as a dictatorship of meritocracy, as if any other alternative were anything that a person shouldn't be ashamed of individually for his or her own inferiority. And this is the enormous, especially why, again, something inconsistent, like even the same Marxism or some radical, both alt-right and leftistic ideologies are coming on the fore. They're not coming on the fore because they have any consistency, but because their fuel is the vacuum of knowledge. And in fact, even our fear of these ideologies speaks of our own inferiority. Like if you believe in tradition, if you believe in reason, if you believe in logic and in science and in history as method, right? How can you be scared of radical ideologies, completely an inch from reality. You are the weak one who even allowed your own community to, to have this spreading, because somebody said, well, okay, but it's not so important after all that kids should learn things in school. They should learn social skills. Yes, because human beings, if they're put together with other humans by default, by our own biology, are not capable of socializing anyway. Right? Here they are present in a school because they've been brought there in order to be instructed, not to be learning how to socialize. Learning how to socialize means you shouldn't be a sociopath. Maybe you should have functional parenting or upbringing in general. There are people without parents, or also that were brought up by others, that are a success, even though it's difficult by a certain standard. But and surely they did better some dysfunctional parents. But this is exactly the problem. Where are the parents? Right? Where is, in the sense, the community as an institution, even just to protect the right of learning? Doesn't seem to be there anymore, because discipline, authority, even harshness have been taken away as a paradigm, as a point of reference. How do you think you can make things work without this? Right? The alternative is not a counter, a response to that. It's a complementary opposite to that. It's the absence of that, because there is nothing out of that. The alternative is emptiness and self-destruction. We know it also from for neuropsychology. We have an idea. If you just are too lenient with somebody, they will be completely incapable of doing anything. They will think that the world owes them something, up to the point they can't even earn for themselves a bread loaf, and they will starve to death. Right? And we are just genetically programmed not to function like that. So engineering artificially this idea that we should get rid of merit or struggle or hard work because there is somebody who lags behind, it's frankly disgusting, criminal, ridiculous. Also because we have a hella welfare state, and people who make more already pay a disproportionate amount of money, right, to maintain people who at that point largely do not seem to make any kind of good use of that money, not to be thankful somebody pays, takes away money from their family, from themselves, just to not to be on the street, right? But again, and that's where the nest of those ideologies actually are. And the fact that things go wrong often in civilization doesn't mean that it's somebody's fault to the point that your capacity there is justifiably eliminated or not to be considered, or somebody owes you anything that you're not willing to go there and take it, including justice for that matter. So that's the disaster that we are creating. So the uselessness of history is definitely connected to the ignorance about history. I explained countless times in my videos why history, by teaching you how to make sense of things on the basis of reality and evidence, forces you to, first of all, start to build some patterns and methods, narratives that must hold together, because reality is there. In part, as we will see now, yes, there is always a risk to twist it, and again, as we already said, there is no true history. But it doesn't mean that at that point, given that we make history together with other people, and so this always this trick of the abstraction of something hypothetical and not connected to reality, there is going to be another person who says, look, that you were wrong about this interpretation, because evidence didn't say any of that. Right? If you wonder how history and science in general are valid and effective, it's because in a healthy academic environment, people criticize each other's works, right? And are already, and because of harshness, like imagine somebody says, no, well, it doesn't matter that you misinterpreted, a major narrative like before about World War II. Like, without understanding the most elementary political and strategic notions of 1930s and 1940s Europe is one of the single most important and famous moments in the history of mankind, and about which entire generations wrote oceans of ink with an extremely developed and complex historiography that you should be at least aware of and to have read in part just to express any judgment about, in fact, about something that has been already that much inquired. No, it's not important. Just write whatever you feel, right? Just imagine things work like that. When you enter, a higher education, and that's something scary, it should be challenging you, right? It starts with examinations. You should be answering correctly. Is there anybody who says, no, who can say that this is true or not true? It doesn't matter. Those hierarchies, those institutions, objectively have so far navigated us towards a better understanding of the world. And now our civilization has developed accordingly, right? Study how people studied history before and what we know today and how we work today. This is empirically proving that that knowledge is effective. As you know, I'm also extremely critical of the academy, of scholarship, etc. But this doesn't mean that a person that has absolutely no understanding of that can simply say, well, yes, I think the same too, but then you're not even aware of what those people say. And even if you did, you wouldn't understand anything because you have no background or competence to criticize, right? And this is true in every field. I cannot criticize a doctor. I can have a broader understanding of what are the things that go wrong, or that even in that field, and as I know, it also can be anywhere in economics and engineering, whatever. I see it because history does provide you with that kind of universal scope, not necessarily to be an expert in other people's fields of specialization, but let's say to the point of knowing if something goes wrong here like this, it's likely that the entire system goes wrong at the same level in the same way. Yes, of course there is that thing, but as a critical person, I also realize that if you don't even know the basis, how can you have any opinion, right? And then the person will come, in fact, as we'll see now, with other prejudices about, no, because history is all wrong. Yeah, good luck with that, prove it, because that's the thing, right? You come up with that observation, burden of proof. You stated that history is all wrong. Any proof of that? Right, even methodologically speaking, even empirically, even just with something that can't be countered, you should be able to rebut anything, right? That's where funny things happen. But I say myself that we, as doctors, etc., we are all faulty in a way, right? We, as I say at the very beginning of the video, I do consider myself an ignorant. I don't know history even minimally as I should, according to my standards. And it's also a matter of standards, because again, without harshness, there can't be standards, right? So if you even are habituated to lie to yourself, well, it's obvious that you will never trust anything or anyone, including history. But that's your problem. This has nothing to do with the others or with history, right? Or maybe it has to do also with the others in part, but you may magnify that in a completely an objective way because you're paranoid. That's an entirely different point. So history is not useless, because until you rise through the ranks, you really can't get that. It's true. But when you do, you'll realize that knowing history is just being aware of why the world works the way it does. Right? The greatest problem, again, with people I meet to say, well, I don't know history. I already know that if I talk to them about anything, politically, socially, that person doesn't actually have a scientific understanding of it. This is not a matter of subject, of specialization, of area. Like maybe you're a good technician, you're good at something, but still the overall understanding of many things that is not in just politics, war, society, but something that can get down to your mind, which is, in fact, as we've seen, different whether you know all those things or not, can really make the difference. And it's always the same story. Yes, I dislike history. Why? Well, I don't know. First of all, immediately the paranoid attitude, it's not to say I don't know much history, unfortunately. No, I dislike history. So you're immediately setting your shields up, right? Saying, no, I'm not an ignorant. I should be thought of, because you already know that there is something wrong with you not knowing those things, because you're a human being. You're supposed to understand that knowing history is important without even knowing history. Everybody does, right? Because we don't live in a world where history is an option, where we are reminded just because if we talk with a specialist, history is all around in the media, everywhere. You can't really escape it. Everybody makes references to something past because we live in the past neurocognitively at every moment. We don't know what the present is because it's already past in the moment before it reaches our brain from our sensorial receptors. So the question is, yes, you're kind of aware that you are an ignorant, but you put up together this set of excuses for which you have to unload your complex on a fictional stereotyped understanding of history. This is the same with any form of knowledge. I've seen people doing this with religion. I've seen people doing this with science. It's all the problem with that. Yes, there is a problem with history. There's a problem with science. There's a problem with religion. They're all bad. Those are the real problem. Those are, it's the evil historians or the terrible Bible, or it's science and it's all wrong because it's manipulated by evil people and there is no truth and it's all they all want to trick you. That's the same story, right? It's called paranoia. And the more I studied history, and the more I found out that the major feature of non-civilizations is paranoia. That derives from lack of knowledge, because if you know things, you're not scared, right? It's normal to be scared if you don't know things, because you don't know what to expect. So immediately from that attitude, behaviorally, you can expect from a person the type of opinion on these topics as well. It's always the same old story, and that's why paranoia, in fact, is a major feature of countries habituated to totalitarian regimes, because they are effectively prevented from knowing, right? Also the hostility towards the external, this obsession that somebody wants to take you out. Even if it were true, that they don't know. They have no mean to know whether it's real or not, because it's literally invented, right? So that's, if you invent something as a paranoia, and that loosely matches with something you interpret as, in fact, matching actually with reality, that doesn't mean that there is a merit from your side, right? There may be a minimal logical merit because you formulated the concept, but if you didn't actually, come up with the thing, and you, up to that point, you had no idea even what reality was about, or it was a completely fictional idea, you just got lucky. And in practice, this actually never happens, because reality is too complex for that to, say, narrow, let's say, interpretation to match with it satisfactorily, right? That's why propaganda is easy to make, because you can find single things matching that, however, are just a tiny fraction of the entire picture, and that shows you instead that these things do not match at all. But since the person doesn't have any of the broader picture, they're just going to believe that exactly. And it's as if, as historians, we just wanted to give for granted a theory without having proven that, and so collecting just the data that go in favor of our hypothesis, but completely unhinging that from the context, from the rest of the evidence, and making that section. We don't work like that. It's pseudoscience, and you won't find anybody publishing articles with that, because just the person, it's not because somebody pays them to prevent you from telling things. It's because that same person has studied, knows how method is used, and reads something that he would have not even written the first year maybe a university, says, wait, you're just a disturbed person that is believing in conspiracy theory and is writing this thing actually to support propaganda from some side. And the interesting thing, I would say, psychoanalytically, in a way, is that I'm convinced deeply, and the more I have learned history, the more I'm convinced of this, that people always know when they are wrong. Like, there's not really someone who does something and doesn't realize the, I don't know, the superficiality, the recklessness, the unscrupulousness of their own actions, right? And that has to do with knowledge. Because, again, you may be actually surprised by eventually what happens later, exactly because you have no idea how the thing works. But that happens because you have a superficial knowledge and understanding of that. And therefore, you're not able to calculate, even just, by loose probability, but things that may happen. And so you discover you were an idiot after, in fact, this is how it always happened, after you actually learned how things really work, right? But before that, you knew that you kind of didn't know I wanted to take a longer step than you could afford. And that is wrong, morally. So I'm personally I'm getting to the point that I think that individual responsibility is so important, and especially in connection to the existence of a truth, that not only what you do and seem to be evidently, let's say, more directly, immediately responsible for, you should be judged for, but literally everything that happens to you, even if somebody does it on you, because your same ignorance, your same impreparation is the cause of that, right? And you say, but somebody did actively something against me. And yes, but where do you put the boundary between, what was your responsibility to prevent that, to be prepared, to be thinking that it could be a possibility in general, right? And that person's responsibility, and especially who's in charge there, you are that person. Yes, we built civilization also to make justice, and so to prevent collectively the such eventualities, right? And so we have justice, and we prosecute criminals, and we punish them, and so on. But that stems from the realization that there should be a core of values in which we agree on, that we evidently understand is not something subjective, but something that must have some degree of objectivity, at least in relation with the overlapping with reality, that derives from knowledge, derives, in fact, from also historical understanding of things that happen. There can't be justice even if you don't make history right. You have to make an inquiry for whatever it happens. What did actually happen? And so that expresses a confidence in the possibility of sorting out reality. If you don't trust history, if you don't trust science, why should justice work for you? Why should you ask for that? Where do you think that gets from? I mean, if you're paranoid about those things, why shouldn't you be paranoid about human groups in general, right? And that's, of course, the degree of delusion and falsity and, in fact, dishonesty that a person who doesn't appreciate such things really has. So I could go on for hours explaining how useful history can be, how accurate your understanding of the world can become by knowing things that happened before that. From my perspective, I can tell you that, we can all relate to this because we all learned something in our lives in the first place. So we know what it means to know that things were actually in a way that we didn't know before, right? So learning a lot of history from my professional background and beyond is fantastic, because I realized that before I might even have had kind of still good ideas already, maybe because they were taught to me in a good way by my parents, by school, by other people, but that until I found out, I wouldn't really visualize in their depth. I would just know that something was the case, but I couldn't quite demonstrate that. I couldn't factually know whether that in fact was real or not. Learning history is instead clearing a fog. It's as if you saw all the past that happened for as a flow to this point to realize in which direction we are going. This is extremely useful because it tells you what you have to do in a sense. I don't know, it seems banal, but if you don't know a country's history, how can you make politics with it? If you don't know its history, it means you don't know its politics, itself, its society, and therefore you wouldn't have any idea of what to do. That's why extremistic ideas are just lame and coming from a lack of knowledge, because they don't match with reality, and not in the sense that that we can't do better, but because reality simply tells you that in order to achieve that, you should have to destroy everything and re-questioning the same, humanity, not its values in themselves. That's why, I always mention communism, right? If you were to attain communism, you would have basically to fight against physical existence, right? It's impossible by definition. And all our values actually derive civilizationally from the realization of difference, of inequality, of probably of diversity. That is to say, those who are better at something do that, and those who are better at something else do that. This is also something that Marx realized, right? But refusing the idea that there was an intrinsic difference in everybody, in something that goes beyond any kind of grouping, and that is based, in fact, on this magic that our action is. So that I'm not defined by a class, by a race, even by whichever group, right? Even those groups that, religious groups that inform so heavily my culture, my idea or understanding. What matters is what I do. And that's what I should be judged on the basis of. And that's where my merit stems from. That's why works are crucial. You can't just wish for things, right, and pretending that they will happen. The only way to measure your fate is to take the step, that leap forward, exactly because we don't know what is going to be next. But if you truly believe, on the base of your knowledge, that you have matured about things that happen, that what is going to happen is likely going to be that, well, you'll be way more successful than a person who has zero idea. And that's, again, why those radical extremistic ideologies that in my opinion are all leftistic, also the alt-right ones in this sense, are based on a superstitious delusion, and in fact was denied by all traditional cultures of anywhere in the world. That is to say, you can't do anything because you're just under something else and you will go down. The direction of that ideology is towards the sub-personal, is engineered to make those lesser people so that you can also exploit them. As in fact, you can see under totalitarian regimes there are, in fact, national socialist regimes, all of them, right, easily, right, because they are based on collectivism. Whether they fool you in a nationalistic sense that you are equal to another just because, you were born on a same piece of dirt, basically annihilating your any personal merit just because of some, standard reason. And there is really, considering the educational standards of today, anything to be proud of being born anywhere in the world for that matter. Or in fact, socialism. That is the delusion that you can, somewhat by forcing people into equality of outcome, would have any kind, so basically putting matter in function at the center of the universe, for which humanity should just adapt to it, not the other way around. So humanity to work with matter to improve their own level is the ultimate delusion, and it will just create slaves. And at that point, how can you say that person that had an opportunity to be a real person, you can't be anything better because you're just defined by that condition? That's anti-human, and that's in fact what Marxism is basically about. It's the denial of any possible trace of humanity, and the destruction of it, if there is still some. And so you habituate them. You're just telling them that whatever they can't think, they will never accomplish anything because they are determined by that situation, right? And this can be based only on ignorance. This can be based only on the presumption that the the delusion that you're fed with is true without verifying that. And not just that is, maybe a theory. That is true according to what people tell you, right? It's true that you can't do anything if you're born in a certain way. And that's all what you need to know. Those are lesser people, and those will stay lesser people, unfortunately, because empirically we know that who comes from that background will have huge psychological difficulties in coming out from that status, right? Every human can do, but in practice, if you have built up a human being to maturity into that thinking, there's very few that practically can done statistically about that person. And it's a huge problem for the others. And then you wonder why there are people who are exploited, right? By a certain degree, we all exploit each other, and it's fine, because again, we are all able to cooperate on the base of our respective capacities. But when somebody doesn't really is capable of producing anything, unless there is some evident physical damage, like a neurological condition or some physical incapacity, whatever, well, in that case, I will be more than happy than paying for that person, as I do, because it's not fair that that person cannot change that the crippling condition. But as far as their mind is concerned, I will not pay anything, unless, again, they are very problematic individuals that at least we have to keep control of. But it seems that many even personality disorders, etc., are not actually due to pre-existing conditions, or something cannot be reversed, like the multi-personality disorder, whatever. They seem that those people do it purposely, that there is nothing actually there that corresponds to a pre-existing immutable change. It's the person's mind that makes it. And again, the materialism we've been so in with in the last generation is telling us instead, no, it's all predetermined. It is not. You're basically denying that the greatest of humanity. Actually, you're denying humanity. It's not even about human rights, right? It's literally you're denying that humanity, because you're saying that doesn't matter what the person do, that thought can never be changed, right? Again, if you impose them, and if you artificially indoctrinate a person to thinking like that, it will be extremely hard to elevate that person again, but it's not impossible. And the more you insist on that, and the more you are actually damaging humanity. Another preconception about history is the idea that history is somewhat unproven and false. So I will try to going towards an increase of quality of criticism, because the uselessness of history is as dumb as it sounds. Now, the fact that history is proven or false, as we have just explained, history cannot provide you with that degree of full certainty. But this is the history of the half full or half empty glass, right? You cannot deny that there is a certain absolute amount of liquid, because you're only willing to measure the volume of the glass and not how much of that is filled. So when something is, say, for this reason, history is unproven. It's false. This is an idea that I've met, especially in those countries that came from a totalitarian background, dictatorial, authoritarian past, that for the thing we just said, very differently from actually believing blindly what they were told, since they wouldn't know anything themselves, couldn't actually be confident at all, and they would live in paranoia. Again, that's where I, as a historian, as a person, as in general, as a traveler, etc., I've met with outside, especially the more distant you go from the center of the West, that it's not a matter of indoctrination, right? Indoctrination can work for a very set of stupid ideas that work, again, from that set of lack of knowledge in a community. When a person is eventually confronted with a more developed thought, you meet with literally either, sometimes they met probably the incapacity of believing that something was real. They had to deny it, say this is not possible. Why? Because you've been told it's not. But probably this idea of fear, this idea of total permanent distrust towards anything. Again, civilization is clarity, is reason, is logic. Anything outside of it is darkness, because it's fear. Because you don't know anything, and therefore you think that you're prey of the unknown, which is a superstition, right? And in fact was condemned by all the great civilizations in the world, right? Never think that even in, I don't know, as you know, I hate the liberal concept that before monotheism there wasn't something like dogma, but fortunately, in all great empires there were some prohibited cults, because they were exactly the ones that were fringe, were extremistic, were communistic in nature, or collectivistic at least, and they were based on this superstitious concept that is to say you are subject to some evil dark forces, black magic, all this stuff that come mostly from the earth, that assume, say, this deterministic form of what seem more readily evident, and that doesn't have to do with the idea, with clarity, with reason of the better person that you can be, right? Witchcraft was outlawed by the Roman Empire way before it became a Christian empire, and in many other, basically in all empires, was always the same, and the pattern is always the same, even in Orthodoxy, in heterodoxy, in, I don't know, in Christendom, in the Caliphate, or whatever. The type of ideologies were always the same. And the burden of proof is, of course, on the historians as well. But there is a shortcut, that is to say, of course, the historian, if brought to literally, having to demonstrate every single thing and saying, prove that this is true, cannot prove it. Just like, the mathematician and the physicist cannot prove reality, because reality is based on some completely abstract principles that, however, seem to work. Like abstractly unproven principles that, however, work such the line, the point, or surface, because conceptually we kind of understand what it is, because it works when we work with it. And yes, we kind of live in complete ignorance about even the existence, life, whatever, but this doesn't prevent us from, flying planes, building skyscrapers. Now, on the contrary, it helps us. So nor the historian can prove, right? I don't know how many battles I reconstructed in my life. I wasn't in any of them. I don't know what they were like. They happened, all something more recent, but most of them happened many hundreds of years ago. And of course, I don't know what actually happened there. But if I have many sources, different people at the time who wrote about it, more or less they are sometimes they may be interdependent, but sometimes they're maybe completely independent. And there are many, and they tell that battle fundamentally went that way. And when I study the rest of medieval warfare, I see that the pattern is always the same in the tactics and the interaction between cavalry and infantry, and there are some motives that are coming even in other eras. I'm able, through evidence, through analogy, through an accurate criticism, etc., to say, well, yeah, of course, I wasn't there. And not even those who were there actually understood fully what happened, because how can you, right? Were you after everybody? You have no idea. This is also, in fact, Clausewitz says. But it's exactly from the unknown that we have, first of all, wanted to sort out how it went, that those sources existed in the first place. They told us how it worked. We're actually answering more or less the same questions we would pose today, right? We're the same human beings. We're the same problems, after all. And therefore, we have kind of, quite approximate, but still acceptably approximate idea of how things went, right? So the fact that you cannot prove things in absolute terms doesn't mean that you can't have an expertise that tells you, look, very likely things actually went that way, because we don't have any counter proof of that. Is reality all an illusion? There is a terrible demiurge who invented literally everything that is happening in front of our eyes constantly. We can't know that. But as far as we live in what we can come to know within the realm of our gnosiological means, it seems that reality works this way. So even if it weren't so, still what happens is evidently connected with that. We live with that, you live with that, because even if we're not in each other's heads, we understand each other, we see things happening to us, and we kind of relate, and we can't communicate and express ourselves, telling what we feel, live, think, etc. Like that, if you keep going against this concept, you will simply fail, right? Can you deny physics? Can you deny gravity? We have zero idea of what gravity is. Do you want to throw yourself off of an 8-story building just to prove that science is wrong? Check whether gravity was just an illusion? I don't think that you're gonna do it. Why? Because you perfectly know that you would smash yourself on the ground and would have to collect you like marmalade. So let's not be idiotic. Especially, let's not be imbecile. Right? I'm also disappointed how the two terms are very often misused, because idiotic simply means somebody who can't speak properly, that makes wrong logical connections, can't really properly understand that. Imbecility means weakness. It means a lack of moral resistance. And while it is true that idiocy and imbecility are connected, because again, as we've seen, without knowledge you can't really even be morally resistant, still we should be careful about addressing the two aspects properly. Now, somebody else would say, but history, yeah, let's assume you're right. History is useful because if you prove certain things, you can kind of understand how reality works, but isn't history too theoretical? History is too theoretical, right? Just recently I was making this video, which I was telling what somebody told me, that basically you can't understand a people until you take a vacation there. And I said, well, one can really understand that if you talk with people from there, if you study the history of their country, if you have a broader idea of things, whether you can have a pretty solid understanding of how they reason, they think, what's their culture. No, you have to go on vacation there. Okay, so you will surely, because that's practical. That's what I was told. The theory, no, history is just theory, and that's why I prefer going on vacation in a place to know, and I will know what a people really is, better than a PhD, because the PhD is just about theory, and I refuse to making a PhD because I dislike theory. Yeah, you did, I'm sure. So you will go there for 10 days in a second world country because you're too poor, because you work like in the sales store somewhere, because you refused being a PhD. Take a bunch of selfie there, coming back home and telling everybody that how that people's minds, that you deeply understand at the hardcore level the culture, their thinking, their tradition, how they really live, right? I've met people who have traveled a lifetime. They've been hundreds of countries, literally unique people. They didn't know anything about history, and in fact they would say terribly stupid things about each of the places they went. And that's what generally happens, again, when you have a lot of substance, but you don't give it a form. So, yes, we know lots of things, but if you don't order them methodologically, systematically, with a criterion, with a hierarchy, you will not get anywhere with that. And you will actually lack that qualitative knowledge that you cannot achieve until you rise through this increasing difficulty you have to bring to as a burden of proof each of the time. So again, you can't be expert. This is properly what intelligence means. If you know in Latin the etymology of the term, it literally means to read into, to read through, right? So this simply means that, as I was saying before, you visit a place that you know nothing about historically. You went there, say, 10 years later, after with a good historical education about that place, you terribly love it because you can read through it. Whereas at the time you had no idea what those buildings were, those monuments meant, who was there before. You had zero idea. You lacked the connections, you lacked the context, anything. And you come back there and you love it. And you want to see very specific places. And it will make you feel great. And you will learn other things. And it will be amazing. It will be part of your life. It will build you further. That's the reason why you can travel all the time. If you don't know anything about the places you travel, it's useless, right? It's a waste of money. You can't have fun in general, but you will not necessarily become a more intelligent person because of that, or at least not in a sensible fashion for being, if anything, by our scientific standards, the ones we built as a civilization to verify who is, qualified for even at least teaching other people about it. So history is not theoretical at all. History is grounded in reality because we reconstruct the past through evidence, and evidence doesn't stem from our imagination. It stems from reality. Of course, you have to interpret the evidence, and there is a degree of theoretical element there. And by a certain degree, there is also a degree of abstraction, because human mind cannot make any form of reasonable thought without some form of abstraction that is meant to train in putting things in perspective. But you have to feel with info, with evidence. And so if that is connected in reality, you can hardly say that history is just theoretical. What does it mean that history is just theoretical? Just we think that, I don't know, as that imbecile that answered the question on the World War II, that's a proof of that the person has no historical understanding and just guesses what history was. So a person who reads that answer may be misled into thinking that, after all, you may never know, because this person says one thing, then you find Schwerpunkt that says the complete opposite. But it's just abstraction, it's just speculation. Well, no, that means that you don't have the means to understand the value of different opinions, and that stems from lack of knowledge in turn, and it's not a good sign. In science, also in history, in fact, theory is something built on evidence, right? So it's putting together the evidence with connections that, of course, you should be terms cause, effect, link, acceptable in the realm of plausibility, because that's where it gets down to, right? You have evidence, but you have to connect it with each other, right? So things must make sense, and they must make sense, as I was saying before, with battles, for example, when you compare it with the rest, right? So that's why among historians we're kind of civilized usually, especially, well, okay, let's skip this this aspect because it's debatable, but let's say that we criticize each other exactly because we know that we have to make sense, we have to be reliable, we have to say things that are concrete and real. So if we make a bad reconstruction, just yesterday I discovered that I misinterpreted one battle in, I don't know, I think the hundreds that are reconstructed in my PhD thesis. It's a big deal, because if I had published that with a wrong interpretation, just because I was wrong about reading, I was lazy, reading one passage that said one thing instead of the one I thought was saying, well, I would have provided you with a false information about that battle. And the reason I found out is that I actually stayed, differently from the time I wrote it. Now I was more relaxed, I was colder minded, I was looking at it for finding out a specific detail, and I realized that I had misinterpreted a line that helped me build up the battle. So that's a big deal. So what did I do? I made a mistake of theory because, of course, I can't change the history. It would be pretty cool if, historians could, for some strange power, would be terrifying, by the way, alterate the reality of history for how it really happened. But in this sense, we have a responsibility, in fact, in depicting it accurately, because otherwise people will believe that, right? And the reason is that because they have a purely theoretical knowledge of that, whereas we work with evidence that this is real. So history is not abstract, if that's what you mean, right? If history is theoretical, the entire knowledge is theoretical. So that's what we have neurologically to do with. There is no alternative. Are you saying that, I don't know, your knowledge of your shop list is theoretical because you will eventually not find, I don't know, the items you want to buy and therefore you cannot really rely on it when you go grocery shopping. What kind of stupid idea is that, right? You obviously make that leap of faith in a way, in hoping that the reality will correspond to your shop list when you go to the supermarket, and when you come out of that, you may be disappointed because a product was finished, or maybe you didn't have enough money to buy everything you had listed, but you will be pretty satisfied to realize that reality was there, that there was a supermarket with items in it, and you can come back home and cook yourself a pretty squalid meal for celebrating. Well, that's another pretty idiotic and strictly idiotic. Of course, there's a bit of imbecility too there, but idea about the fact that history is theoretical and therefore there is no practice in it, right? Of course, you will know very much better about that country if you have studied anything about that consistently for years than the average person going there for 10 days, taking selfies in a place that doesn't understand shit about, just to show off on Instagram when they come back, right? Pretending that they have some form of culture or anything. There are other worse ideas, such as, I don't know, you can't understand history if you... I forgot to add this to the list. Let's say it now. You can't really understand history if you didn't live there. Or if you're not, you can't understand that people's culture if you're not one people, if you don't have it in the blood. But the latter is racist, by the way. The first one is just idiotic as well. It's as if, in universities today, we, in order to know about World War II, we would just have to interview centenaries, because we wouldn't know how to operate with our books, our information, because, oh my god, just these people know that. And before, our life memory, those who died, sorry, you can't know anything about what happened in the past because you weren't there. That's one of the single most stupid ideas I've ever heard. It's pretty well known that living in a place or being from a certain country or whatever has literally nothing to do per se with having even the slightest understanding of any minimal, again, political, military, or social reality they lived in. Being under the bombs doesn't mean you understand anything about war. You may do from an emotional point of view, but if you don't understand why they're bombing you, or why you're shooting back, or what's going on, like, the question is you're just an imbecile, right? And an ignorant at the same time, because you must know these things, right? If anything, if you want even to fight those wars. In fact, again, it's not a surprise that, I don't know, in Russia, the levels of literacy and just any kind of historical knowledge or whatever, but I must say also in Ukraine, as a matter of fact, but it's just, I don't want to weigh on that too much, is zero. Why do you go fighting in Ukraine? You go camping. They got those kids from gyms. They told them, want to train there. They make you train for free in the army, and they sent them straight in Ukraine. How can a people fight a war in that condition? I mean, how can you think that there is any moral resistance to somebody who has to go to fight a war? If you don't even put them there without even them actually knowing it's going to happen. But it's the same thing, right? Having zero understanding about the rest of the world, about history, about anything, and making moral relativism, saying it's all wrong, it's not true, etc. Maybe because you have a disgusting educational class that is radically undereducated, as a matter of fact, is corrupted, says bullshit, doesn't teach you anything. Yeah, you can grow distrustful, but hey, there is the rest of the world, and here things do not work like there. So you could actually put aside this kind of bullshit to acknowledge that you have a problem, and you should fix it for yourself, and that you shouldn't be weighing on other people if just for not knowing history you still think that you're entitled to some strange imperialistic idea on governing on other people, or denying their national identity, or thinking that, I don't know, they're just an appendix of a culture that actually developed mostly in the other way around, from those people civilizing you in the process. And again, it's so disgusting because it's directly connected to politics and warfare in society. You understand how useful history actually is, right? So before whining because your son got killed in a country that you still, thought was yours, just maybe study history before making children and becoming a parent, and maybe you will create a better world where, a better community, a better state with people don't have their children going to fight in foreign countries for getting killed for reasons that you can't even understand. That's maybe before becoming a parent, being a civilized human being, but that seems to be too much, and we should even feel pity. No, because that's their fault. So this aspect about the theoretical nature, if you are not there, you cannot really understand. If you're not born here, you cannot know my history. Well, yeah, yes, except I already knew it when I was in primary school better than you. Now, and it doesn't take anything, right? This is the ridiculous thing. I'm not saying I'm so educated, so knowledgeable. Blah, blah. It doesn't take anything. It doesn't take anything. Even if just you read 3 or 4 books, you would know more than that person. And that's the average person. So it's the easiest thing in the world. There's nothing I'm proud for. I just do it for instinct of survival, right? I don't do it because I think that I want to be better than you, right? Now, at least I hope I want to be better than you, of course, for that matter. That's the difference, that you don't give a shit about being better than yourself, because that's where it actually gets down to, right? That's what means having standards and being harsh for a good reason. The other interesting thing about history is history is boring. How many times you have heard this thing? But history is boring. Come on, it's about learning dates and names. The teachers are so bad. They don't make me like it, and I've always remained with this impression since school. Well, all right, but that's also not a good excuse not to understand history in the first place. History is boring for those that do not know it, because it turns out that nothing is boring, right? Literally, in either sense you can interpret it. That is to say, if you know anything about the complexity of the world, you can get easily intrigued by it. And history, as we were saying before, is practically, of all the subjects, the largest one, the most unlimited, the one that doesn't stop to, that contains, in a sense, all the other subjects. As a historian, you could be even, a historian of economics. You can be a military historian like me. You can study things that, sometimes not even the direct interested know as well as you. And that's beautiful, because you realize that there's no boundary, right? If you study, let's say, say any subject, you remain more or less confined within it, right? You can't connect it. There are practical applications with that, etc. But let's say no other subject like history fundamentally gives you the possibility of spacing, of interpreting on so many different levels and from so many different perspectives. That's why it's also more complex and why it takes a long time. There's really not a single ether that you have to follow in order to know it well. So calling it boring just means that you have no idea what history is, that you know practically nothing about it. Dates and names are part of the harsh, impositive necessity that we have sorted out to give you that minimal standard pack of education that I give you. It's not particularly interesting, but let's say if you don't even start with those, you can't go anywhere. If somebody tells you, some of the worst people are those who say, yes, I love history, but not the evidential one. The evidential one is wrong. It's all coming from all a different mindset. That's also historical ignorance, because people who came up with that idea didn't say that at all, frankly. They were just saying, saying to a military historian like me, a Clausewitzian, that, the Histoire Bataille actually said, scholars actually said that they didn't have, the battle single events didn't have to be studied. What? Have you even read those authors? They weren't saying at all anything like that. History must be studied First of all, from an evential point of view, then you have to fill the gaps to understand that why those events happen at the same time. You must forcefully know the events, right? Do you want to study the human body without bones in it? What kind of anatomical understanding would you have of that? And especially, why wouldn't be a date or a name useful, right? Who did make history? The classes, Marxist classes, some strange ghosts that we don't know the name of. Single people made that, and you must know at least the most important ones, especially the ones in position of command, who took the most important decisions. Of course, on the base of politics or society broadly meant, we can't know the single people that took decisions all the time. We approximate, as we were saying before, but this doesn't mean that you must not know the name of someone. It's that easy, right? If you don't know who Charlemagne or Caesar or Napoleon were, like, what the hell are you studying even history for? And also, if you don't know the dates, how can you simply trace cause effect connections? What kind of broader understanding that doesn't require kind of a timeline you're talking about, right? It doesn't make any sense. If the first thing you should do when you study history, first of all, you should, having learned dates and names by heart in school, seriously, and by a really systematic degree. But the first thing you should do for your first year of university as a historian is relearning them all by heart, plus filling the gaps with some further knowledge, consistent knowledge as well, in the first basic medieval history exam. That's how you start a university career. What do you think? That you go to university not to learn dates or names? There are stupid people that I've met that started studying history because they didn't want to study maths or law because it was too difficult, right? If you think you can study history without a scientific background, go study something else, right? Don't be a historian. You will be completely useless as an individual. And in fact, all the people that I knew from that background bailed out or just took a bachelor, and of course they didn't do anything historical in their lives because they didn't give a shit, and that's the point, right? In order to be an historian, you should care about history. And nobody who cares about history says something so stupid that dates and names must not be learned by heart. And history is definitely not boring. And it's so based, in fact, that everybody can find something interesting in it. And again, it's the lack of awareness about the baseness of history that is disturbing per se, that a mature person, that an adult can simply come out with the idea, history is boring, is lacking completely the magnitude of knowledge that stands beyond history per se, that cannot distinguish again from the dusty kind of mice beaten manuscript left somewhere with nobody to use or any practical purpose. And it's terrifying. It's like thinking that I have to make a open chest surgery. I can't do it myself because after all, what's medicine? It's just a few things to learn. This one is in the top level of human stupidity. I'm using the term stupid a lot, right? Because stupid, you know what it means? Stupid means that it means it comes from Latin, means to be surprised, to be amazed by. So somebody that, as I was saying before, somebody didn't know something so clamorous and then suddenly understands it and says, "Wow, really?" Yeah. So it means a nitwit fundamentally. And there is a special circle in hell for these people that are the ones who also often come up with some form of historical presumption, historical awareness that is history is written by the winners. Oh my god. So I don't want to use insults too much, but let's say, do you know Polybius? Do you know Flavius Josephus? Do you know any source of any country that was defeated at some point in a war that wrote extensively about being defeated. Like, what the hell are you talking about? Are you brain dead? Is there something there that didn't work when you were a child? You fell off, the chair when you were at a table. You had some trauma. You were defeated in open field and eventually prevented from writing or publishing your own history. So you had to come up with this. What the hell happened? Seriously. History is written by historians, first of all. So also knowing historians and their background is important, is realizing that. And of course, the countless amount of losing sight historians that are completely denies any sense of the statement. It's like, again, having a classist interpretation of history. How do you even, like, you see what's terrifying is that there were some leftist or even Marxist historians up to some time ago that were actually intelligent people, even from their moral perdition standpoint. Say that I was talking about the tripartite. I was thinking, of the tripartite social order in the European peoples. There's all the question that whether the Middle Ages inherited the older division between the warriors, the preachers, and the workers that eventually was portrayed by 12th century sources, especially in France. And so, in fact, France, think about Les Annales, etc., had for a long time kind of a structuralist Marxist bias, right? Those people were actual historians with an enormous knowledge, right? Today, we have and there was a criticism saying, this thing in the Middle Ages didn't quite exist because, if these classes were, at least if they existed, were mixed, right? They would interpret them maybe from their standpoint a bit more like classes because they like to stress the socioeconomical boundaries. But they said, there is not such a thing because society is way more complex, etc. So the class is to be understood in a much more shaded way. Today, as we were saying before, Marxism is coming back to the idea of completely decerebrated kids who believe that, there is anything proud in claiming that you believe in Marx and not in God, and that, you have to justify that you're a poor ass shit idiot for the fact that somebody stole your future instead of, doing something provided with any form of meaning in your life and learning how to make an effort and work hard for achieving your objectives. So we are in front of a collapse of individual quality. And I say to everybody, this is the right moment to exploit it, by the way. Don't be afraid of them. Because they are the weak side. They can be, the more they are, the weaker they are. Right? They don't have the power. They're not desperate. They're not starving. They're not anything like the revolutionary masses of before that made, at least were always subjugated again by the establishment, but at least made at the beginning some bloodshed, destruction. These people are completely amorphous, like they're like maggots. They don't have any resistance, so you can simply walk on them. And so the degree by which we fossilize on imbecile monofactual explanations or definitions and clichés and whatever. The other one here I didn't insert in the list. In fact, history must be studied not to repeat the horrors of the past. This is yet another idiotic statement. Mostly comes, actually this phrase means we don't have to make Hitler and Mussolini coming in power again, right? It's always like a liberal, if not leftistic thing, right? For some reason, the horrors of the past are legitimately and objectively, yes, the Holocaust and other despicable things, but I don't know, collectivization or the Cultural Revolution, or Stalinian purges, those do not account as the mistakes that we don't have to replicate. The obvious thing is that history can't really teach you to be a better person, and so to be more intelligent to solve problems of today that are never going to be the same of the past. Some things seem the same, some things are, as broader mechanisms and dynamics are similar to the past and are comparable, But if you feed people with thinking that there is kind of the boogeyman in the past and that the only thing you should be doing is searching for the boogeyman in the present, you're basically deresponsibilizing people in first of all, making any effort to understand who the true boogeyman is in a different time from which, the boogeyman you're searching for that was just the product of that specific context that will never replicate itself historically, for better or for worse. And therefore, just having a cheap, flattened, useless, politically, ideologically weaponized, and ultimately vicious and simply evil misuse of history for making you feel better about yourself. Well, you should, again, only feel disgusted for saying something so stupid. History can really help fixing problems, but it teaches you that you should be understanding current reality in order to fix them. It's not a wishful thinking. There's not the cards with the criminals that you have to collect, and once you recognize them all, you have to make a screening of all the other people around you to check whether there is a next Hitler who's coming to power. It doesn't work like that. You have to follow, again, dramatic detail and still in comprehensive effort the entire world spectrum in ways, of course, that you can't afford most of the times, and still, again, being very careful, even drawing parallelisms, etc., because that will probably re-evoke actually something more similar to what you're trying to avoid, right? Imagine somebody, it's like with racism. I presume that most people in the last decades became kind of properly racist, not because they actually had a background of racism, but because they were called racist all the time. And so we have arrived to the point that there are kids that are born today into thinking that racism is a kind of a category. That again, as we've seen, if you're white, you're automatically racist and all this bullshit. That is racism itself. That is to say, you're causing you're racist for saying that, but you're essentially indoctrinating other people in being racist, in that superstitious idea that just because you are from a certain background, you must forcibly be constrained into and relegated into it without any hope of change, right? And this is an actual form of oppression. And again, breaking free of that is one of the most beautiful things that you can do in life, right? Things like critical race theory are the product of a very culturally, morally, and individually inferior background. It means that you're essentially the fourth estate, you're the scum of the world, who, again, realizing its own subpersonal essence, wants to draw in the Tartarus all the other people. No, other people will walk over you, will exploit you, and will rule. And they will be right in exploiting you, not because you're of a certain race, but because you decided to be an inferior intellect. And as such, you should and you must actually be discriminated specifically against until you understand how to better yourself. Because without pressure, without harshness, there is no ability for you to understand that you have to learn in order to be worth of civilization. So fortunately, again, we are probably coming to a great consolidation of this stratification, for which, the lesser will deservedly be ever lesser, because again, at this point, there is not even the excuse of material shortage. Everybody has what it takes to succeed. And even if for somebody it's more difficult, this doesn't mean that there is no help, that people are, against you. If you do something right, people will help you. If you do something wrong, people will discriminate against you. And it's normal. It's supposed to be like that. You're the bad person, not the other people, right? And history should teach you this. And you are essentially the product, not of oppression, but just of a failed educational system that you contributed to destroy with your bullshit about socialization and, alleged freedom, that means actually forcing other people to not to learn anything so you can make a game. All the other people dump as you, but other people do not stay to that game, right? Because they have something called human dignity. So the last step, I would say, is more like not against history, but the category. And I'm even sympathetic to it up to a certain point. Maybe it would be better to make another video about this. That is, what about historians? Are we reliable? Are we good? Right? Some say, yes, history would be a good thing if historians were good. And so if I don't have the time to be a historian and I want to read a good history book, and instead I just read trash, as it very often seems to be the case, and historians often become some sort of, more entertainers and or, they ride the wave. Not really talking about history of what they study, but or why history is important, etc., and being aware about it. No, it just, there is the hot topic, there is the provocative connection, and so they just go for it, and they don't give a damn about teaching actual historical things. This is very common for historians. Schwerpunkt, you're close to that. With all these historian videos, you're doing the same thing. Well, if you actually check them, I still talk always about the historical meaning, right? And I still make, of course, a lot of historical content. That's what I like the most, telling you the truth. Well, this criticism is legitimate up to a certain point. Again, as we were saying before, you can't really criticize somebody that is above you in scientific terms. What does it mean? It means that even if you are a PhD, doesn't mean you are a competent person. But in practice, empirically, chances are that you are dramatically more aware about the topic that you have been researching than the average person that may have this prejudice against you. I personally met with a few prejudice against historians. Telling you the truth, people tend to like historians, and I as people, right, as not even as a category, just say an historian is just like the more or less sensitive, introverted, decent guy, with glasses and an old jacket that still has his job, teaches kids and hasn't pro. Well, that's a bit like a diminutive idea, but it's true. I mean, I found out that in the United States, at least, school teachers are, on average, at least there are more millionaires on average among school teachers than among economists. And frankly, it doesn't take much to understand why. I don't know whether it's here as well, but yeah, it's possible because, well, okay, let's not get personal, but the question is it good even that there is that positive bias towards the historian? Well, I don't think so, because I think if the average think that the historian is a reassuring figure, I mean, from one side, yeah, again, it's okay, because you'd expect that the historians say reassuring things that also make sense, generally speaking. And generally speaking, we do. Again, historians are mostly interviewed, not just a random historians talk about the world, right? We interview historians on specific issues and topics. And this seems to reassure people. The average historian, is the one in documentaries that they take as a host. They make those, 10-second cuts before scenes of battles randomly interspersed in the documentary, so to see this guy sitting with the books behind and saying, oh, blah, 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 blah. It was like that, cheap, dumb stuff that everybody can understand. And so everybody on the sofa saying, how so good. Finally, we have an expert. I like this guy or this girl. Well, that's I think that's a deterior form of this. I think the historian should be provoking, thought-provoking, and in ways that naturally can happen in different ways. Some historians are more, in fact, like actors, right? They like to make, like in TED Talks, they want to show you, the affect, the emotional, the affect. I am not very sympathetic to that, because I don't think they actually tell you much. They may just impress you and attract you and say, well, maybe, that field is interesting, but they will not make you understand necessarily how deeper and kind of longer and more complex the historical deal is, right? And that's what I try to do here, for example, by making hours-long videos, by telling you, look, everything is very complex, so be careful how you evaluate that. I also give a lot of interpretational patterns. For you, maybe I'm preachy, I don't know, but you seem to appreciate somehow my broader kind of universal standard of comparison, etc. Because, as I often say again, history has meaning as long as you can frame it in reality, and so there is a broader moral that you can extrapolate from it. But I think that, again, that sense of fact of relaxation, of kind of security that the historian provides for stereotypically is not really what it should be, right? And that's why I'm in fact so critical. The point of the reliability, however, starts mostly when people start having historical ambitions on their own. So again, the average person watches a documentary, feels safe, thinking that there is yet another historian wasting his life reading stuff for you and telling you. Then there are those who start studying history, start saying, but or getting interested in it. And some of you are actually like that, and get interested in this or that figure, kind of discrediting others. I passed through that as well, right? I wanted to have a reliable source, somebody who would really tell me things how they were, and not how, and also correcting other people's mistakes, other historians' mistakes, etc. That's still the phase in which you haven't really understood much about history, because by the same fact you're needing that figure means that you still are not driven enough for finding things yourself. It can be difficult because you may lack the sources, you don't know where to search, but you have to learn that. It takes time, it's difficult, it's expensive in terms of times and resources, but you have to get through it. That's the hard side of the story. There's no shortcut, right? So that's why I, for example, try to be comforting, at least in the measure in which if somebody asks me something I can answer, etc. But I also don't fully reveal everything, meaning that of course there is always, first of all, something else that I could say that I forget, or that maybe I don't talk about in a certain moment, and or I don't necessarily tell you how I got to that knowledge, or at least I would be open to tell. There's not really a great problem with that, but I suspect that, again, the average is not interested because they just want the facts or whatever they think these are. From the other side, those who get a bit pickier and really want to know where the thing comes from are also a bit inconstant, because at some point you may disappoint them for some reason, or they may deem you in fact as unreliable, and they're coming back and say, like me, after all, the majority of scholars and academics are not really that much. Well, in part it is true. We're just very average people. You would be, as everybody is, right? It's just, yes, that, as I was saying before, history does make the magic a bit. It does really change your mind a bit in ways that help you understand things better, and provide you also with the capacity sometimes of explaining it well in the way it's useful and people really want to know. If historians are unreliable, history suffers consequently. Both the history meant as a method and as a set of knowledge. It's like science, right? I think majority of scientists today are very narrow-minded, ignorant, and largely unsatisfactorily educated individuals. So I think about historians. But this doesn't say it can't be seen exactly because we exist in a way. So we can make mistakes. We can fix them. and still the evidence is out there. So we're not working on something that you can simply pollute to the point which you have just to abandon the subject altogether, because it's like, all historians are so bad that I shouldn't even learn history as a consequence. And there is the stereotype that at least the academic historian is very haughty. I am very haughty. I have relational problems with people because of that. Because again, I'm very inquisitive. I mean, not even inquisitive, but let's say somebody says something doesn't make sense. I want them to arrive to the point of saying at least, maybe at least to explain themselves and to counter argue something about that. And so that's how it doesn't work. But I'm doing it to the benefit of that person. Like for as far as I'm concerned, I already know the answer. I'm just playing with you, right? I want you to get to the point where you say, well, you know what? You made me understand this. Thanks. Instead, no, it's, oh my God, it's the paranoia that I was talking about before. Because deep inside they know that their attitude and the dumb thing they say is just some kind of defensivistic strategy to cope with the lack of responsibility and understanding, etc. I've met with, rather than haughty, yes, my personal experience at least is that the haughtier the person, the less qualified it is. And I don't know whether this fits to me as well, but I personally presented, I remember, a work once, and there was a professor who was the only one who behaved like a jerk, and that, didn't like what I did, and corrected me, and I found out the corrections were wrong. All the others were fine, that were fine with my work and say it's well done, etc. That already tells you how much even just the opinions and the reliability can change, right? It's obviously that we all think differently, and so even in a pool of in that case we're all professors, right? They presented the same work. The work is the same, it's the evidence, right? And they could have, like, if you had listened to that single guy, I would have done something that he wouldn't even comment on, right? He what's wrong with this, and it doesn't tell you. You ask for an explanation, it doesn't answer. So start thinking that there is something that doesn't quite work there. In fact, the only example they provided me with was an information that I verified, and he was wrong and I was right about it on the basis of the evidence of the source I was using, because he confused it with another source. By the way, just think about the historical standard there, where all the others says, well, yeah, it's a good thing you wrote here. I like it. You can fix this and that, but it's very sound work. It's well read. So you may never know what's in the brain of somebody. And very often, I must say that, again, the more complex, the more complex you are, and the less objective you are, right? That guy was also complex because of a physical fault, right? And I hate to be that guy, but I must confess that, yes, even physical appearance often very much has to do with how people behave with others, and therefore I also interpret reality through this, because again, you have to state that level of openness to understand everything, all the factors that can pour in the judgment. But rather than haughty, I think that the most important thing is not how you're perceived, but how you actually are, right? If somebody, for example, criticizes my work, is stern but fair, and says, look, the work, this one is a mistake, because I have the evidence through which I can tell you, look, you did this, and I can tell you even where you did the mistake. If you fix it, it's cool, you can go on, and it's going to be great. That's a great attitude, and that's frankly the same one I use. I'm very critical here on Schwerpunkt because I'm not addressing a person individually, but when I meet with a student during the examinations and this person makes a mistake, I don't say, well, what an idiot. I just say, no, wait, I give you the opportunity. You're here, I'm going to evaluate you. Show me that you know something good, that you can make that 2 + 2. That is really not much to ask you for, especially in an examination or something so basic like some of these questions can be. And let's talk about it, right? So I try to be good. And then it's just when somebody is really an a-hole, because you understand that there is something beyond there, that they can't accept that they're failing in a way, they start acting in an uncontrolled way, and that means that you are an imbecile, because again, you don't have the moral strength to even see when you make a mistake, to admit that you made a mistake. And so at that point, I can become haughty, because you're being an a-hole, then I'll be that as well, right? And that's how I treat other people, and that's why they think they are haughty, because when they see that, they feel judged or criticized interrelationally, they start thinking that you are the problem because you are an arrogant, right? Not because I'm actually saying something that makes sense and you just can't accept it and try to flip the thing. It's like with criticism in anything else, really. Even when I started Schwerpunkt, I thought that considering the topics I discuss, I would always receive a great criticism as a historian. People would tell me, look, this is not true. Very long, intense, detailed, informed criticism to prove that, haha, you're a loser, look at here, I know more than you. What actually happened, and I was coming from Facebook groups that are toxic, that's how I decided eventually to start a YouTube thing, when I said, here, I stopped having something to learn here, considering the average, it's just time wasted, let me talk. I didn't get, first of all, I can say I got almost zero criticism. Of all the stuff I've made, of all the videos I've uploaded, really, I received an overwhelmingly positive feed. But the only times I'm criticized, there is not like, you're wrong because of this and that reason. It's just like a single line or 3 or 4 words like, it's all a lie, it's wrong, and it would be useless to ask that person why, because if you don't even provide with the evidence that I'm wrong, like, you're just trolling fundamentally, like, even if you don't know it, maybe intentionally, right? The only times you receive something more composite as a criticism is something that either doesn't get the point you're making, or hasn't listened to the video, or it judges you on the base of some kind of hurt feeling for some reason, like, all these attacks they make, you're weak, you're all these things that you have to strengthen yourself, harshness is good, merit is good, you don't have to whine. I think that is to strengthen somebody's backbone, right? Because it worked with me and it helped me being effective, and I'm happier now because of that. And it's hard at the beginning, but then it makes you understand the hard logic. It's as if you were squeezed against, the attrition of reality, and so you can develop this thicker skin and going through much more smoothly. And that's exactly what happens. If you feel hurt by that, it's because you're weak. It's because you're a hothouse flower, right? And that's why I feel the need of saying that. It's not because in person I'm actually a jerk or something. I try always to be understanding, and I like to understand, because as you understand, through these videos, I want to know what's behind somebody's opinion and mine. In fact, I think at least with the people that I click with, I'm able to really understand a lot easily, quickly, and it's always easy, at least for me, to in a first exchange of lines to understand whether a person is thinking right, or is just, you can perceive the lack of any moral consistency from the other side, right? Even boredom, apathy, in the properly lack of any emotion, which is not the Hellenic apatheia that was suffering, but being controlling your emotions. So, and this, in my opinion, is spreading like an illness, like a disease, enormously, especially among young people, because they don't have purpose anymore as a consequence. So the historian must be that kind of arrogant, must be somebody who retains control of the situation. Because when you go to speak in front of an audience of experts, of people at least to get interested in the thing, that are just there listening to you speaking and eventually will make you questions, you have to have a great confidence in yourself, at least in the things you're saying, in front of them to withstand any kind of, and very often unpredictable, right? If not just maybe statistically within a certain range, but still you never know what kind of questions they will ask you. If you don't know something, you should just say that, and that's also proof of strength. So history has checks and balances that make it work effectively. It's not right, historians are just haughty or bad, or just they think they only have it, and the others not. It's just it. We are very different people, believe me, within ourselves, and it's very difficult to make of the whole a bunch. But it is true that at least I was criticized at a point. You see, there's always this rivalry between archaeologists and historians. The archaeologists say that historians are always sitting on their chair, like me now, and we say that archaeologists basically don't understand anything except material stuff, and they're terrible at history, in fact. And I must say, I know some archaeologists are also very good at history, but they're rare, right? Again, it's the average person, right? Archaeologists tend to be dramatically more materialistic, narrowly concerned. Historians, it is true, we do space in something that may seem theoretical, but it's really not. Because when you talk politics or war, society, how do you think we handle them civilizationally? It's just opinions on broad things, broad axioms. We need those anyway, and generally speaking, we know how to make them. People who have a competence know how to make them. So I think all in all that we're not so bad, and that we should be listening a little bit more. But still, yes, I understand the problem myself from the within. I understand especially the fact that we are also, like in any other scientific field, we're all hyper specializing, kind of losing perspective, etc. It's a broader civilizational problem at this point. It's not just us. So whether you should rely on historians or not, well, the answer is you can rely on historians only when you become one of them, or at least you get to their level. And it's very difficult, because that's the only moment in which you can correctly evaluate them, correctly judge them, correctly assessing their knowledge. And again, if you don't reach that point, how can you? So it's always the same point. But it's true that there is a common scientific language and method that allows you at that point also to judge other categories from if you reach that same level of development, right? That's why I say I don't know anything about say physics, but sometimes by talking with friends that are physicists, it emerges a strange pattern for which you understand that they think something about the world politically, let's say, that is informed by their physical way, but you know that from your historical perspective that they're lacking maybe that element, and maybe they think you're lacking that other from the other side, and maybe you can't quite get full each other's perspective, but you can work to fix it. But still, subjects are different, right? For example, I have a mathematician, it's another who was an old schoolmate and a PhD in maths, and he's a talent actually. He was very smart, like those those people are always maybe with the heads in the clouds. He wanted to study philosophy. Once I proposed him, well, let's study history together at university. And he and this guy is a leftist, right? And you realize he's a leftist because he, outside of the realm of maths, that in a way, especially in his case, he works very abstractly, right? It's not concerned with, in fact, much of a political or social application of those notions. It's testing whether it's about he's attracted by the pure idea of free ideas forming, right? And so that's what he's fascinated by that mechanism. Whether those ideas are connected with reality or not, right? Maybe they are, because mathematically it turns out, yes, you can. This guy, I don't know, was passionate about finding equations for describing sound waves. It's quite fascinating indeed. But again, aside from the interpersonal relations that you will have with people in your own environment and conferences or whatever, like, how do you think that specific knowledge will help you to be a better person politically? Right? Maybe it will teach you, I don't know, the importance of free thinking, of the opportunity of, I don't know, of having an environment where you can really be free in working with those ideas. But then, when does the positive application actually come? Where do you start understanding whether maybe it's better or worse, let's say, whether a social thing is, a social rule is to be applied, or, what do you know about war? And you understand there's a very abstract approach to all these things. Like, it should be this because in principle I believe that. Yes, but where does this principle rest on? Do you have a factual proof of that? Do you have a sociological evidence behind this thing is true, or even just mentally speaking, do you know that it's just pure thought moving in the air that will tell you how, for example, human beings behave? You see, it's more like an escapee from reality than an actual. If you have reality in front of you, why don't you sort that out? Right? He may be doing this mathematically, but again, how does that teach you to be a better person, to decide, I don't know, the next policy or military action or social reform per se, without application in those fields, right? History touches those fields, at least in a way that tries to encompasses them all, without even a particular expertise, because there are political scientists, there is the military, there are sociologists, but still historians manage to put together a perspective that none of the three of these categories, for example, normally have. I say it easily. I think I understand war much better than the average military man. It's actually quite renowned as an idea. Today it's not a taboo anymore to say it. Like, it's like the guy before says, you can't understand what it feels like, what it means war, because you have never been under a bombardment. Well, it doesn't take for me to be under a bombardment to know what are the ranges of the moral effects on an army when that happens, because I studied military history to the point that even if I wasn't there, at least I saw how that thing could impact the system. And I don't have ways to measure it, but you don't have it either, because you can't feel it individually. But how the hell do you know how that is going to affect your entire battalion? You may see it. Yeah, I agree on that. But as a historian, I will read your affirmation. I will kind of learn that is the case. I have a pretty, fluid, flexible, and I think accurate idea of how morals flows in a military situation, even though, again, it's kind of very difficult to measure moral forces. But I don't think that just having been there once will make you skilled at how that is in a broader military sense, in like how it's going to happen, for the sake of positively applying that notion to make things work better next time. Right, and this depends on, of course, the degree of strategic scale that you are assessing. Again, you can understand that for a platoon, for a battalion, for a division. But let's say, again, if you don't study war from that standpoint, how can you, if you have never done it, how can you understand that? It's difficult, because a battalion commander has no idea what it means to lead a division. And when we study military history, we tend to reconstruct exactly that instead. At least if we study the art of war, which, again, most military historians do not actually do, because most self-satisfied military historians are not good, because they don't study these things. They don't study war, how it's fought. They just circle around that. It's as if they studied little anatomical pieces without understanding their part of a whole body. just excluding all the rest. And after all, there's no other way to study it. This is what also von Clausewitz says, right? Even as a general, he said, eventually things have to be written down, they have to be reconstructed, and we still struggle as people that we were there to sort out what actually happened, and also how to judge battles where we weren't in, right? So direct experience is more important, but mostly just in those positions of command that encompass a much large system for understanding how that thing by scale really works. And that's what on the base on which the Clausewitzian theory is built, right? You couldn't have a knowledge of the theory of the art of war if you were just a platoon commander or studied just platoon actions as a military historian. You should have theoretically both, and since we hardly all have a military experience in a high command post, and just nor the military has by direct experience, because they hardly are actually doing that in a real war most of the times. Well, military historians who specialize in the art of war, usually speaking, understand that better, because that's exactly what they specialize in, and this is overlooked. So that's where you should appreciate historical quality, in the degree of competence in the field, as always, for any other scientist, but also, of course, the method it uses. Because if you just studied, again, platoon actions, you would immediately understand that you would have less understanding of war in general if you studied just that. There are people, for example, who study war just in a single, very narrow portion of time and space. You can't really understand fully warfare if you work like that. I remember it with my master thesis. I reconstructed a 13th century battle, and it's not until the doctorate that I understood how much deeper my understanding could be before having properly reconstructed other battles in other times and places. So much that today I would probably write another type of thesis, another, I mean, maybe not so different, but still I would, especially take away some unnecessary things that I at the time thought to put in, but I couldn't appreciate individually to understand how they should be hierarchically framed within that work. You see, this may sound theoretical as a problem. It's not theoretical. When you encounter the evidence and you have to reconstruct a battle that was fought for real, that somebody describes in ways that in fact match also with other battles that you have studied in model, and that's not theoretical. I will explain it to you, and it will sound theoretical if you don't have that kind of experience in your past. But to me, it's really concrete. I really can feel the concreteness of it. I can really appreciate how in that battle things occurred on the basis of what we know, exactly because I've seen it also elsewhere. And so I'm not fooling around. I have a much better judgment than somebody like me at that point of the master, when I still hadn't that experience on my shoulders. So I think that this is valid for any other activity. This is not just about history, but it's still particularly important with history, because as we were saying before, history has no boundary. So you have literally to build a basis by yourself, but they must make sense, they must work. And this is in fact what amazes me of history, even just as an environment, as a discipline, historiography, is that we managed to build, and this is universal, human, civilizational, a type of subject that does appreciate competence, that does appreciate logic and rationality and clarity and sense making, that this thing should have been devoid of any base, just like civilization, right? How did we even manage to reach the place we did? We managed step by step, and it takes a long time. So any shortcut we have proven shipwrecked clamorously. Maybe it helped exactly because we saw how what a failure that really was. But it's on the basis, in fact, of that knowledge and a lot of other knowledge that we could take the next step. So I'm pretty confident about the historical capacity of sorting things out. And when I see all these prejudices against history, I see just not somebody's opinion. I see a universal language betrayed. Because I know that things that are said are not just somebody's opinion, but they are a historical product themselves. I know what's in that person's mind when they say that thing. And I know what to expect, and all the times I will essentially get what I thought I would get. Again, lack of sensitivity, lack of intelligence, lack of awareness, lack of responsibility, some kind of, presumption and arrogance that, things have to go the way you wish, and surprise, surprise, they don't. So, to me, again, it's dramatically easy and becoming especially easier to get somebody's history, literally, from their historical understanding, and some phrases and everything, right? Their politics, their mindset, their background, anything. I will just understand it in the tone, in the type of things they write, in the attitude, in the scale. And it's interesting because you can measure it eventually from where they come from, and so that makes history as well, because you hear the same things from same places that are different from the one of other places. That is not a prejudice. That's actually, something very consistently stemming from history. You can't do it on the basis of their age, which is also fascinating, because you can have somebody who maybe in absolute terms is less intelligent, but maybe much younger, and so you realize that probably that person will become much more developed at some point than another that is still struggling with certain things at a much older age. And you can almost, it's as if people betray themselves too, right? Even when they don't want to tell you something, you immediately understand that there is something there that probably is connected to a certain issue, because these issues are always similar after all. Again, humans are, that there's a thing about history, it's very important, it was hinted at before, that is too complex explanations are never, say, complexity is important, right? But things also have to make sense, right? If you put together too many things and you don't effectively connect them in a way it makes sense, you don't have very clear ideas, right? And the reason why this happens is that these things you put together actually are kept together by, after all, much simpler logic than it seems. And since you still don't see it in its simplicity, because it may be that in order to achieve that awareness, you have to still, stop having the benefit for the doubt of something at a higher level or understanding, you will struggle to say, you will complicate it. You will probably start making hypotheses that do not make sense, because you still want to clarify why it's the case, and you are kind of still talking with yourself, trying to say, oh, how does this, fit with the other? It's not entirely clear. But when other things make you rise above and make you look at those same things again and say, wow, but it was much simpler than I thought, because it was still lost too much in detail. This is an aspect that may seem to you, it's not that details are not important. Details are everything, because they're part of the whole, but it shouldn't be the primary focus when you reconstruct something, especially historically, right? You shouldn't just fixate on, one interpretation, one little thing of the wall, and saying, this is what makes sense for the whole thing. Those are monofactorial explanations. They're not good, right? Even if the rest kind of appears to make sense, you have to be sure it does make it. And the reason why mostly you will not check that is because you will think, finally the shortcut, right? And the way of essentially fixing the whole thing without working more. And sometimes you can't really afford to do that successfully, you know. But again, intellectual superiority is always a double-edged sword, because the fastest, the most effective it makes you, and at the same time the greater risk you're taking, because you want to make sense of bigger things, kind of saying, well, I've already seen this before and so I can sort it out more easily, but still reality there will show you that it's never like quite the same thing. But yes, there is still a pattern, and that pattern doesn't go away. It's that pattern, that narrative, the sap of scientific culture. And those who, haven't gotten there yet, they simply can't see it. So there is this degree also frustrating communicability between those who still have to learn, still have to grow, still have to lag behind. And at that point you should be, and paradoxically, this is what I'm trying to do here, right? I objectively have a very few chances to test my audience historical awareness. I don't know, in other words, why you follow me in practice. What's your background? What you actually understand? What you actually know? How do you see things? Why do you think that? After all, the things I say are very harsh, really. I mean, they're very heavy, and probably also displeasing by a certain standard. Especially if you come again from those backgrounds, that essential. But that's the point. Striking at that, spot, that vulnerable spot, is the point of it all. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't have a purpose here. But also, in fact, I have an exemplary duty, because things I say, the way I reason, the topics I choose, they all inform your vision. So if I have made an impact here, I see thousands of hours listen to my videos, well, these things leave a mark. There are people who leave now having listened to me speaking for a very long time, having told them really a lot of things. Sometimes I also change idea, right, or at least I improve it. And there are, again, always new things to reflect on. So here I see, for the entirety of Schwerpunkt, I had something like 106,000 hours visualization time. So you know how much this is? Let's make a brief calculation. So you see how I depend on technology for making calculations. I'm getting old. So here we have 12 years of Schwerpunkt. There is somebody who has listened to me uninterruptedly for 12 years. Just think about that. It's as if I had literally, 12 years is, it's the same amount basically of mandatory primary education. Primary education, because this is the only mandatory one. 12 years. I could have informed a person for 12 years. Basically, I changed this person's life forever. Right? And I know that even though these 12 years, of course, are distributed among many people, most of which do not even follow me regularly, that there are people whose life I changed because they told me, because they wrote me. Right? So there is a responsibility here. Because again, this is not about how naturally reality interpolates, and it's all very complex, but factually, how I'm still responsible for you, right? Even if, again, you're responsible for yourself, as I often say, and nobody, it's you're obliged, right, to be in that existential condition. I'm also, however, fully responsible, because I'm responsible for everything. There is that line from the Little Prince that says, there are so many foxes, and this one, however, I don't remember what it says. Paraphrasing says, "It's the only one I took with me, and I love it." And so this is not just a fox like all the others now, and we are forever responsible for things we tame, for those who tame. This is a beautiful phrase because it's like even realizing that you're always responsible for somebody else. All the time. You're fully responsible at the same time. So just imagine you're just not fully responsible for yourself, but in this sense, you're always responsible for the entirety of the world. Think about that, because it seems really to be the case, and it's powerful, right? So for today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.